Hello everyone, David Neff here, and I am with Snake was right. We're doing a little bit of a debate autopsy from his debate with Matt Slick on ethics and morality. Welcome, Snake. Thank you for joining me.
Howdy, thanks for having me. So I I wanted to hear your honest thoughts. I want to hear criticisms for sure.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So, overall, how do you feel the debate went, and who would you feel won the debate?
I mean, there's different levels to look at it because a debate is often rhetorical. On some level,
Right.
obviously, I think that I had the better arguments. Um, Rhetoric wise, I mean, both our audiences are just gonna think we won. As far
Right, of
as
course.
I think it's like the Oxford style debate where they take a poll of the audience and see if anyone's
Yeah,
opinions changed. Probably, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm gonna think that I did better, but I think that I mean, he's skilled at what he does. So I think I made good arguments, but I think he did. I kind of fell a little bit into the trap of I felt like I gave good answers to it, but we couldn't move on from this question of like how do you know anything at all? And that's kind of where
right.
he wants you, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And so, one of the things that Matt's like, I know Matt's like for almost 10 years. He's a good guy. I like him personally, but one thing to know about him is, as his name suggests, he is very slick.
Hmm.
Uh, um, so one thing that I've noticed in while watching his debates is that he is one of the people that really try to steamroll you, and really try and force you to be on the defense as much as possible.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think Matlock likes being on the defense that much. It was just why he keeps pushing you, pushing you, pushing you to be on the defense. So that's my take. I kind of think he kind of fell into that little trap of um, letting Matt Slick steamroll you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I got in pretty much the offensive points that I wanted to, but I think I didn't hold his feet to the fire as much as I wanted to. Although I don't think that
Yeah,
I got totally steamrolled because I would push back and try to do that. And the
right.
thing is, I think it's a legitimate question what he's asking. It's just that he keeps going back to it and back to it and back to it.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, his whole argument is basically cry why, all the way back to God until you get, oh, you're at a stuck road. It must be God. Um, so I guess this is the way that I would have answered some of his questions. So, the law of identity. How do you know anything? Well, the law of identity is simply a result of human language. We give things titles. It's simply an inevitable result of language. And then from there, logic can pretty much be broken down into its mathematical form.
Yeah, and then of course he would just say, "Well, how do you know that that even makes sense?"
Right, exactly. So, yeah,
So I think,
overall, I
yeah, I think it comes down to like how can you trust your senses essentially
right,
because you can test actually the laws of logic as long as your senses are accurate, and that's the thing is like, well, how do you know that what you observe is accurate at all? And
right, exactly,
I made him admit that of course Christians can't rely on their senses either because Christians can have delusions. The soul does not have perfect accuracy in its perception, if there is such a thing.
right,
But I don't think the implications of that really sunk in, which
right,
is that we're all in the same boat. Which is that he kept trying to say I assume that my sense perception is correct, and actually I should have said it like this: I actually assume that my sense perception could be incorrect, and
right,
we're all in that same boat. We all have to live with that fact that what we're seeing could be a delusion. But
Right.
I tried to make
Right.
this point that if it is a delusion, well, then there's nothing to talk about. But if
Right.
there is some
Eh,
accuracy, then it's an if then question. I think that totally went over his head, or he just deflected.
Right. Exactly. And Maslick is pretty much the king of deflection when it comes to debates and arguments. So
So
yeah, that's
I wonder if that's just the end result of like you can't really break that because that's his whole style is designed to just constantly deflect back to this one question, no matter what.
right. Exactly. And I'll say for most of the debate, it wasn't really the question of um, whether or not morality was grounded in God, but it was more of a discussion on his quote unquote tag argument on the basis of logic and inference. That seemed to be what you guys were talking about for the majority of the debates, and not really a whole lot on actual ethics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tried to keep moving it back to okay, well, even if there is a God, because I actually gave that as a given in the beginning of the debate, even if there is a God, well, he's going to have some sort of basis for his decisions. It can't just be arbitrary or random. Otherwise, it could be anything. And so I had him concede a few things, or um, yeah, like that God cannot contradict himself, things like that. So there has to be some kind of logical basis for his morality, and
Right.
we couldn't really get past that part.
Yeah, and I felt that overall one of the big arguments that you really should have. I can't. It's been a while since I've actually watched the debate. I probably should watch it again. Um, like the whole idea of my God can beat up your God. How do you like? I can easily just claim that my God says this. Ethics is always right because my God says this. Um, and one of the things that is worth pointing out is that God, whatever religion you are, whatever you believe, God likes the same things you like and hates the same things you hate.
Mm-hmm.
So how is appealing to God any more subjective than our own moral inputs and ideas?
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a better way to uh, put in the point that well, the explanatory power of just saying, well, God just is the way it is, and He is the explanation, and it's in the definition of God that He's correct about morality. I wonder if there's a better way to make the point. Well, I can just define nature that way.
Right, exactly, and that's the thing. One thing that I noticed in the debate is that kind of asked you some questions about Christian theology, and I'm just kind of curious, how much about Christian theology do you actually know, or have you actually read anything on Christian theology?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of bizarre because I went to a Catholic school where we had to study the Bible. I read the entire Bible. I was tested on all the stories. I was tested on the theology. We took Christian morality classes, Christian theology classes specifically. So I felt like he was just using that as an excuse to get out of the criticism where he was saying, well, my God, by definition, has to make sense. So your criticism that it doesn't make sense is
Right,
not criticizing my theology.
right.
I I think I should have probably asked him, well, what exactly do you think I got wrong? And at one point he asked me, like to define the Trinity, and I just said it was the triune God, and I thought that would be like explain. I thought triune would get the message across that it's three gods in one person, but he thought that that was the incorrect answer somehow.
Right, and I should point out that it's not actually three gods. Christians aren't,
Yeah.
or at least Christians say they aren't polytheists. It's still monotheism. Um, so I think that's one of the things that you kind of misunderstand a little bit. Christian theology is monotheism.
Well,
They
no,
would say
I'm
that,
yeah, I'm perfectly aware of that. It's three persons in one God.
right,
They
exactly,
believe that it is that yeah, it's a single monotheistic God. Um, I remember in your debate you kind of pointed out how that doesn't make sense, and I don't think it
right,
makes that much sense either. But that's what they
right,
believe.
right, exactly. I did point out that such an idea of God is completely incoherent,
Yeah,
but I digress. Um,
yeah. I think he
so,
said like just by definition it's that way, so therefore you can't criticize it.
right, exactly. So, I know he brought up in the debate the mathematical stuff about the New Testament and the Gospel of Matthew,
Yeah,
and I think you mentioned that you actually wrote something that same mathematical thing.
yeah,
Would you mind if would you mind pulling that up? Because I'm really interested in seeing it.
yeah. It's somewhere around here. I've got. Let me pull up the rules first because I had to follow a bunch of rules, and I don't. It's. Do you know the term gematria or gematria? I'm not sure the
Yes,
pronunciation.
Gematria. So yeah, Gematria. So in Greek and Hebrew,
Yeah,
um, numbers were written as letters. So basically, you count up the numerical value of the letter or the word, and there's your Gematria value. So that's basically Gematria in a nutshell.
yeah. So I got challenged. Someone was talking about that, and I got challenged to reproduce one, and this is apparently like one of the lower level ones. But I my challenge was, but I was just saying how the idea is ridiculous on its face because these
Right.
people, the priests would have like these languages are built around numbers having meaning. So they would have
Exactly.
put a lot of effort into this. They would like there's poetry that is written in this style all over the
Right.
ancient world. So this is something
Yes.
they would have put focus in, but also in the Bible, like it would be impressive if the whole Bible followed one set of rules. But there's like parts of chapters that follow some of these rules, and then other parts will follow different rules.
Yeah, and one thing I think that is worth pointing out in the Gospel of Matthew, where he does his 14, 14, 14 in this thing, in order for Matthew to actually be able to get these numerical values perfectly, he has to sacrifice um, the actual historical accuracy of the Bible, because Matthew leaves out generations that he actually leaves out dozens and dozens of generations. His Matthew and Luke's genealogies do not match up, and neither one of them match up the genealogies in the Book of Chronicles. Um, so, yeah. So,
So they
it's. I think that's next time you hear this argument. I think it's really worth pointing out that okay, fine, Matthew does this, but in order to do this, he has to twist the facts, so to speak.
and so wait, are you saying he leaves out parts of the Bible?
I'm saying he leaves out several generations. So Matthew's idea. Let me just pull up real quick. Um,
Oh, so the way
Matthew,
Matthew is written kind of edits what was like in the
right?
Old
He kind of
Testament.
does some. Yeah. So Matthew does some creative accounting. So Matthew says that, like in Matthew 1:17, 14 generations Abraham to David, 14 generations from David to Babylon, and 14 from exile to the Messiah. So Matthew, with these 14, 14, 14, is painting a picture because in Hebrew, the name David is has a numerical value of 14. So Matthew's whole spiel here is that Jesus is the Messiah, and you can look at these 14, 14, 14, and you can see the theological point that Matthew is making. But of course, in order to do that, he has to pick and choose which generations he wants to put in and which generations to leave out.
Yeah, and yeah, the writers of the at the time would be consciously trying to do this because this was like a big thing,
Right.
and
So yeah,
so
right. Matthew's whole gospel, Matthew's whole spiel, Matthew was written to the Jews. His whole point, his purpose is to prove to the Jewish people that Jesus is the Messiah. And that was the purpose for Matthew being written. So these proof texts here, these little theological numerical inputs, is basically Matthew trying to show that Jesus is the Messiah.
Yeah, and so this was a challenge that was put to me to kind of reproduce, uh, like the end of the chapter at the end of like the last chapter at the end of the book of Mark. And so it's one of the it's a really short chapter. It's not even a page long, and still the entire chapter doesn't follow these rules. So that was just funny to
Uh,
me.
yeah.
And
By the way, for these rules, it's just curious that the Quran and Muslims have the same challenge of trying to bring a surah like it, and hey, try and follow these rules from the Quran. So, I mean, the challenge is not unique to Christianity.
yeah, I tried looking up Quranic Gematria, and I found like one paper on it. I
Yeah,
I don't think I could read the whole thing though. So,
yeah,
but all the rules I was given was I just had to tell a story. It pretty much just had to make grammatical sense, and I could have cheated a little bit, like just listed random, been like, here are the words I'm going to use, and list random words. But I kind of had a system, like, and this would have been something any priest or literate person could have done back in the day. It would have taken a little longer because they didn't have word processors, but
right,
I would make sure each line and most of the words I tried to use were divisible by 7. So I would just make sure each line was divisible by 7 and the number of words in each line was divisible by 7. So that took care of a lot of the work for me. And it was all most of the work was in the last line, like trying to make it all line up. Um, so all the rules were uh, total number of words divisible by 7, total number of letters divisible by 7, total number of vowels divisible by 7, number of consonants divisible by 7, the vocabulary, like the number of unique words divisible by 7, total the value of all of the words added up was divisible by 7. The value of so each letter would have a number assigned to it, and obviously that's silly because languages are man-made in the first place. So did
exactly,
God guide the hand of every time, so, like there was a cultural change to language or something? Um,
right,
but anyway, that's the rest of the rules. First word multiple of 7. Middle word has a value of multiple of 7. Last word value multiple of 7. Verses well, lines 1 through 3 had a total value of multiple of 7. And the way that I did it, this ended up being basically automatic. All of my lines were divisible by 7 because I just did it that way.
yeah,
So I had to have 1 through 3, and each individual one of those 3 divisible by 7, and then the rest taking together divisible by 7. I don't know why the total didn't have to be. Um,
yeah,
well, I guess it was. I don't know why he chunked it up like that, but he did. The guy who challenged me. Um,
yeah,
because I guess in Mark it's not like that or something. I don't know. But the unique vocabulary used in verse 1 had to be a multiple of 7. The vocabulary that was only used in verse 1 versus the rest of the story to have a total multiple of 7. The total words formed a multiple of 7, like the number of words used, and that I think he made there's a couple repeat rules in there, and I just wrote it down as repeats. So yeah, those were all the rules I think, and I made sure all of them were Scrabble approved, real words, and there it is. I could probably blow it up. I'm planning on making a video about it, but about like in depth how I went through it. But that's basically how I did it, and it took me like 2 afternoons. And this is
Yeah,
supposed to be like impossible for humans to do.
yeah. So,
My
but
it,
again, that's not. But of course, if you look hard, and you can find the same structure pretty much in many ancient texts. So, again, it's not unique to Christianity.
yeah.
So, overall, what do you feel were your strongest points and your weakest points?
Well, I thought all the points were strong. The I guess the question would be how strong did it come across to Matt Slick? Let's see. How can I stop share? Yeah, let me see my main points. I thought that like the strongest point is that God needs some kind of logical justification for what he does. And I think Matt conceded all of my premises, but he rejected that conclusion because at some point he was like, well, who are you to say what God needs to justify? And
Right,
it's not about me saying he needs to justify. It's that if he doesn't have rational justification, he is irrational by definition. And
right,
I said that, but
yeah, um, yeah. Do you know if he conceded any other points?
um well, that's basically. I mean, I think he would agree that if you don't have rational justification, you are irrational. But
Right,
that's basically like the only premise, like because if you don't have rational justification, then you're irrational. So God must be rational because God, I I think he agreed to the premise that God is a correct and a rational being, that he knows all things. Um, so those are the only two premises you need for that. Of course, his way out of that is to attack the. How do you know the laws of logic are operating how you think they are?
right, exactly.
And my whole
Uh,
thing was not even to disprove that God was right on morality. It was just to disprove this idea that God somehow creates morality arbitrarily, but that God instead would have to be shaped by the rules of morality that he cannot change, just as he cannot change the laws of non contradiction.
right. Um,
And then I thought it was a pretty strong point of like how you know anything is true at all, which
right,
you can't for sure. But that's it's the
and
only
of course,
choice. It's the only you can't work with information that's just total delusion. You
right,
can work
exactly.
you can um with information that is at least somewhat accurate, and it's not an assumption because you assume that you could be wrong. That's actually the assumption, but it's an axiom that if this is true, then these things follow. And I couldn't tell if he didn't get that or if he just wanted to dodge that point. Do you does that make sense? Like, do you think that could have been done any better?
I'm sorry. What point again? What point again was that? I was looking through.
Just the fact that like this is our it's our only option is to go with the fact, or not the fact, but just the axiom that our sense perception is at least somewhat accurate, and so we can test certain other axioms like logic for their validity if our sense perception is accurate, because that's the
Yeah,
only thing we can do. Because if it is all delusional, then we're just basically just sitting there just having hallucinations, and there's no intelligibility at all.
right, exactly.
And I think the fact that we do have organized thoughts is evidence in that direction. Because if everything was a total delusion, we'd just be confused like a baby who doesn't have any perception of the outside world. They're just getting bombarded with information that they can't categorize.
Right. Exactly.
And then I think I touched on the fact that minds, like God couldn't be the founding of morality, because morality would be based on logic, of course, if it was objective. But the point there was that minds are made of logical processes, which would require, under his view, they would require a God to exist in the first place, but God requires these logical processes to exist and to have a mind. So it's this strange circular argument, which his whole thing is he actually is fine with circular arguments, because I guess that's what his whole style is designed to combat, is the fact that there are these inescapable circular problems with Christian logic. And he says, okay, that's fine because you're doing it too. Even though he's
Right.
saying that me doing it is wrong.
Right.
But yeah, I think observation is just a brute fact when you observe things. So that breaks the circular reasoning. There's nothing that's based on observation. It's just, you just observe things. And it could be wrong, it could be right. But that there's ways that point towards observations being right or wrong. No matter if the thing is, I think the other point, I might have been a little weak at explaining this point, that we both have to start at that point, that observations could be flawed, but that there are ways of trying to test that, and there are ways of building up logic. And both the Christian, even under his epistemology of God, and the atheist, or whatever, everyone has to start at that fact. But he kind of tries to mix these two ideas, like how do you know anything, and we can confirm logic through God. He's mixing this idea that, oh, we can know that our observations are true because of God confirms logic, or my circular argument is self-consistent, so that makes God logic make more sense. And then he was using that to say, he would mix that around with, to try and get out of the fact that he's in the same boat as everyone else, as of not being able to fully trust their sense perceptions.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think the only thing that we can know for certain is that we really can't know anything for absolute certainty.
Yeah.
That's why science is all about falsification and not confirmation.
Yeah. And I think the implication there, I should have hammered it more home in the debate, is that if he can't confirm his sense perception, then he can't know, like he has to be able to rest this whole argument that, well, my argument is circular, but it's self-consistent, so it's fine. He has to rest that on logic in the first place. And if I can't confirm logic, then he's agreeing that he can't confirm logic either. And he gave no answer as to how he could actually do that. He would just kind of skip to the next step and say, well, God confirms, or his circular argument is self-consistent, so that confirms logic, but he has no way of confirming sense perception.
Right. And I think one of the things he really should have done is kind of force him to be on the fence, which God, and kind of force him to get back on the issue of the Bible. Okay, which Bible? How do you know the Bible is correct? How do you know this is correct? What about these contradictions and stuff like that? This is kind of where I would try and force Matt Slick to go to.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a longer conversation, I definitely would have gone there. I think I was just felt a little pressed for time
Yeah.
because
But
I feel
overall,
like I know where he would have gone with that.
yeah. Well, the resurrection of Jesus,
Yeah,
and
and we touched a little bit on it with the gematria, but
yeah,
that was like in the question and answer, I think.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I watched your debate as most of my prep for it. Um,
yeah.
I think
What do you think?
I think your
What do you
rapport
think
for
of?
him. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you think of my debate with Matt?
Oh, I thought your rapport with him was made him a little less insufferable than some of the other debates. Like I watched Tom Jumps, and that was a little more frustrating. I think it was
Yeah.
insightful, but yeah, I mean,
Hey,
it's and
standing for truth. I see you in the chat.
it's always different once you experience it for yourself because
Right.
it was a lot of the same stuff, but once you see like how they respond to the way you phrase like particular phrase things, it's always a little different.
Yeah. Exactly. Um. Yeah. Overall, I think the debate was overall very respectful and quite enjoyable. Um.
Yeah,
So.
I wouldn't mind a part two. Um, I think I would go a little more focused. I think I covered a little bit of a lot of ground in the opener, but I think that's to be expected in openings. I just wanted to kind of set up my whole, just my viewpoint on the whole thing and kind of center it around the epistemology of morality and that it should be no different whether you believe in a God or if you don't believe in a God. Because at the end of the day, we both can have flaws in our sense perception, and we both need to be able to concede that God has to rest objective moral statements on on basically sound logic and valid logic, or else
Right.
he is by definition irrational. And I don't think any Christian would say that God is irrational.
Right. Well, the thing with Christianity is the way that they would cop out, so to speak, is that saying, okay, well, it's not because of it's based upon the nature of God. God's
Mm-hmm.
nature is this way, but of course, then you get into the infinite loop of, okay, why is God's nature the way that God's nature is,
Yeah,
and what if His nature was different?
yeah. To me, it's just restating the question in a different way. Like this whole thing about making the Euthyphro dilemma into a trilemma. It's like
Right.
no,
Exactly.
it's not because God said so. It's because God's nature said so. It's the same
Right.
thing.
Yeah, it's based on God's nature, but okay, what's God's nature, and how do we possibly know?
Yeah,
How and how can we possibly then know the nature of a infinitely powerful um, God who is much
yes,
too
that
incomprehensible for us? If God by His nature is so incomprehensible, um, then we can't really know His standards if He is so incomprehensible.
yeah. So I think one of my stronger points was that you can't tell the difference between if you're just going to say I can't know the nature of his nature. Well, then you can get that confused with any god, including evil gods or made up gods. Um, I think though I probably could have gone a little further with that, like you were just saying. Um,
Yeah, sorry, I had got a text message. Um,
yeah, and I've never gotten any real response to why is God's nature the way it is.
right, and ultimately, I think one thing that really needs to go into it is the idea of God being incomprehensible. So if
Mm.
God, by his very nature, is incomprehensible, then how can we use his nature to judge morality and what's right is wrong? Because, again, we can't comprehend that nature anyway.
Yeah, how can you claim to know that you have the right God if you don't know, if you can't test his nature? Like, you have to take his nature on faith. Like, I think I would be able to formulate a better line of questioning now that's more focused on, like, okay, you say you can't comprehend God's nature, but you say you know this God's nature is good. So how, you're saying you aren't able to identify the traits of that which you label good, but you're labeling this good. How are you doing that? How are you bridging that gap?
Right? Exactly. And I think that'll be a good way to go. Um, trying to think. But ultimately, again, I think it boils down to the question of, okay, how do we even know we have the right God to begin with, and
Yeah.
all of that type of stuff? Because again, because if you're basing it on God, and your God loves everything you love and hates everything you hate, how is that any better than just pure subjective morality?
Yeah, and if there isn't a rational justification for his morality, then it is subjective. It's just based on his mind, and that's it. There's no fact other than his opinion behind
Right?
it. But of
Exactly.
course, the idea of God having opinions is like the strange uh, thing for Christians to wrap their minds around.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Anything going
yeah,
on in the chat we should
yeah.
address?
Just looking, the only people who are active in this chat I see Standing for Truth. Good to see you. And Ethan Tanner. This debate was a blowout. Matt destroyed Slick. So, and to an extent, I would agree that he really. The thing that. The biggest reason why I think Matt Slick won the debate is just pure style and rhetoric. Because Matt Slick is a person. When you do debates, you have to speak confidently and clearly, and you just have to sound correctly. And Matt Slick is definitely a seasoned speaker and debater. So again, he definitely, I think, won on style.
Yeah, and I can see that. I think each side is going to think their side won on the arguments.
Right.
I'm trying to think of a regular person, maybe even Christian. Uh, would they buy the arguments? I think I don't think every Christian buys this kind of moral epistemology, but yeah, I mean, I think I made legitimate points. I think that having experienced his style firsthand, that I can improve a lot. Um, yeah, I was definitely trying to have more of a conversation and suss out the actual details than rhetoric, and he's definitely a lot more polished than I am at that. So
Yeah. So yeah, Matt Slick, of course, as I said earlier, is a great guy, um, but he is a very slick person,
yeah,
as his name suggests.
I think though it's very easy to see his points are really weak if you actually think about it. Um,
Right.
yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
think if I had any other major points. I mean, I think in a way the style is, I'm not sure if you can really quote unquote beat it, because he'll always, like, a style of dodging, you'll never be able to really um, make that person falter or question themselves, they'll just pivot. So
Right.
rhetorically, I mean, I guess you could just tie, but I think, yeah, if that makes sense, because I think that's the whole tactic.
Right.
He's the airbender of debating. But yeah, I think that was most of my main points. There was he complained a little bit about like a shotgun approach at the beginning, but that there was really four main points. It was just the logic confirmed through observation. Observations can be confirmed through corroboration, and there's also the process of if I'm a delusional, I'm not thinking anything. If I'm not delusional, then we can work with it. That was one
Right.
point. The other point is kind of I think in the opening I touched a little on like I expected more talk about like solipsism, which we touched on a little bit. Um, the fact that if your mind is fragmented so much that there's these other minds, it might as well be different people if you're the only mind. Um,
Right.
and then the fact that we're both in the same boat as far as observations being flawed goes, and then belief in God does not absolve flaws in that observation. And then the final point was just God needs some logical justifications. That was pretty much it.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna start shutting everything down because I've been invited to join another stream.
Okay.
But just a couple of announcements. I'm having an open mic this Friday night. A socially distanced, COVID-free birthday party, so to speak. It'll be fun. That is scheduled for Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. So feel free to join me. Tomorrow, I will be having a conversation with James Downard and um, Jackson Weeds. They wrote a fantastic book called "The Rocks Were There," um, straight science answers to that to young Earth claims, volume number one. I highly recommend the book. We will be speaking to them tomorrow, so definitely don't miss that. Finally, next Friday at 9 p.m., I am debating Nephilim 3 on the flood. So that'll be a lot of fun. So there's just some stuff to look forward to on my channel. Feel free to don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button down below. And Snake, do you have any last words?
Uh, no, I mean Nephilim Free wanted to debate me. He didn't say about what, so I guess I'll pick the topic.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Uh, Neff's an interesting person.
Yeah, he and I have had several interactions.
Yep.
He's he's definitely a steamroller.
Yeah.
He's someone you're much better. Like most people, I'll go on their channel or whatever, but I definitely prefer Neff on a neutral platform because he will
Yeah.
he will mute
Yeah,
you.
like maybe one modern day debate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everyone, that is a wrap for tonight. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the like button. And go over to Snake Was Right's channel and hit subscribe on his channel as well. That's a wrap for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yeah, thanks.